Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Project 46 podcast, the UnWokable podcast. We are streaming from a variety of platforms today, and we are outside the Project 46 studios because I have a very special guest that is, he lives in parts unknown. And we wanted to make sure that we could get him in today. And so I'm with Daryl Simmons, the elusive, Daryl E.J. Simmons, excuse me, the elusive. And I've been wanting to get him on the podcast. And he's been on the Project 46 podcast for several times, obviously. And he has a show every morning called The Daily Dose of Daryl that everybody needs to check out on Rumble. Are you on YouTube still, or did they boot you from there, Daryl?
No, they booted us from YouTube because I'm evidently an election denier and a conspiracy theorist.
Okay, well, we are on YouTube right now, so let's watch our election denying and let's watch our conspiracy theorists.
I would never I would never suggest in front of YouTube censors that the national or any particular state elections were in any all misadministered.
Never ever say that. Never ever.
Never.
Say that. And every election in this country is above board. It's always comes out as exactly the way that the voters wanted it to and voted it for it to happen. That's our story, and that's the story we're sticking to. So
absolutely.
Yes, Daryl, you are a wealth of information, man. Every single time I catch your show, or every single time you come on the Project 46 podcast, which we need to figure that out so you can be there more often. You always provide these nuggets of wisdom and information. And I have to say, as soon as I heard about this story, I thought, man, what's Daryl going to say about this? So the story I'm referring to, obviously, is the Chinese spy balloon. The balloon from the Far East has invaded our country. And I know that you have something to say about that, Daryl. So what is this just some innocuous thing, or is this an attack by the Chinese government? Is it somewhere in between? What's going on here, man?
So it's somewhere in between. Innocuous it certainly isn't. It's never innocuous when a hostile nation invades the airspace and territory of one of its adversaries. That's never innocuous. This is not a whoopsie.
Biden doesn't seem to care about it, man. It's like everything seems to be okay.
Well, the Biden administration has a well-documented history of doing exactly whatever the CCP wants it to, and has been friendly enough to keep all the receipts for us to track the deposits straight from the Chinese Communist Party into the Biden family accounts via Hunter Biden's direct deposit slips. So we can see the relationships and how this administration, the White House is essentially leased right now, like a timeshare, with equal openings provided to the CCP and to the Putin regime in Moscow. So evidently this week is President Xi's turn to stay in the White House condos and to call shots in the Oval Office. I'm thinking maybe next month it'll be Putin again. But no, this is not innocuous. This was not innocent. And certainly the story, the talking point that they tried to fly earlier today about how this was a weather balloon collecting data that got blown off course. That went over about like a Led Zeppelin. That didn't fly. Nobody's buying
that balloon, if you will.
Indeed. I wanted to try to use as many synonyms for balloon as possible, and give a cultural reference to one of the greatest rock bands of all time. But I see that. I drove right past. I was too quick.
There, I'm a lot younger than you, Daryl. You've got to remember that. You're a very wise elder member of our community.
Well, wizards are born old. So I've always been I've always been this way. I just lightning hit a tree and I walked out fully formed. But no, this is not an innocent thing. Okay. The balloon thing is not an innocent thing at all. What this is I have my pet theory. Now, I used to work in special projects, and I've done a significant amount of background on these sorts of problems. Back when I was in special projects, if this sort of thing happened, certain actions would have been taken. And they are clearly not being taken today, which means I know what else is being done as well. So I mean, some of this is stuff that I probably shouldn't talk about online, but let's talk about what we can talk about right now. The CCP has fielded this platform. It's a giant surveillance platform being suspended by a balloon. And they fielded this sensor platform a number of times over the last year plus. It's been spotted over Thailand. It's been spotted over Japan. This exact same platform. This is not collecting weather data. Any suggestion to the contrary is a lie. Anyone who speaks English as a primary language and who suggests that this is a weather balloon with a serious look on their face is bought and paid for propaganda because it's bad salesmanship. So what this is this is an intelligence collection platform. We know this is an intelligence collection platform. Now, the question is, why is it collecting intelligence on the US and Canada? Well, the Canada was really just a transit corridor between Alaska and the mainland United States. So if we look at the path the balloon has followed, it's taken it within sensor range of certain strategic resources, certain strategic sites in the United States arsenal. I believe that with everything going on between Ukraine and Russia right now, with NATO buildups, with troop and resource movements, that the answer to the Chinese balloon is actually found in Ukraine. I believe that unless some major policy changes are made and some major personality changes are made in our decision-making matrix, we are being pushed inexorably to World War III. The question is, because DC can't maintain this happy, stable profit bubble where they're right now, where the pot is only simmering and hasn't boiled over into full-blown world war. I believe that China, who is an ally with Russia, I believe China is watching America right now very closely. I've been saying it for 2 years now, that America's response in Ukraine is going to dictate China's actions in the Pacific. And the more we let Russia get away with things in Ukraine, the more China is going to feel emboldened to push itself out. There was a blink in
implications might that have? What implications might that have? So everybody's pretty familiar with the situation in Taiwan, right?
Right.
So this would have extreme implications for the situation in Taiwan.
Yes, not only the situation in Taiwan and all the other micro islands between Taiwan and mainland Australia, but everything in the Western Pacific is up for grabs at this point. China, the CCP has actually released several statements over the last few weeks, ordering Japan to stop making incursions onto what the one China policy dictates is Chinese territory. These are islands that Japan has controlled since the end of World War II, since before then, really. So these are legacy Japanese territories that China lays an ideological claim to, but not a real territory claim to. But according to the One China policy, everything that side of Hawaii, and Hawaii is negotiable, is China. China will move much more aggressively, much more openly, much more freely if they know for a fact they're not being held in check by the United States. So the big question in Beijing for years has been how much can we get away with? If we don't respond to the ground conflict in Ukraine appropriately with strength and with leadership, then that gives China license in the Pacific. So what China is doing right now, in my own falsely humble opinion, is they're watching us. They're also doing so flagrantly and boldly, daring us to do anything about it. There are few military assets we have that can shoot down something 100,000 feet up in the air, but now the balloon is down to 60,000 feet as it flies over Whiteman Air Force Base, home of the B-2 stealth bomber fleet. So, which was the last known position of the last observed position of the first balloon. There are two now. The first Chinese balloon has been transiting.
There are two balloons. There are
two balloons now. Two balloons now. There's one, the first one that we've been tracking now. It's down in central Missouri, and it's It's tracking from central Missouri over Whiteman Air Force Base, which is about halfway between Jeff City and Kansas City, for those of you who are following
My
along and
hometown,
playing the.
Jeff City, right
Yep.
there. Go
So for
ahead.
everybody playing the home version of the game, that's where all of our B-2 stealth bombers call home.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's transiting eastward. It should pass just south of St. Louis as it transits over to Tennessee and the Carolinas. Now, this gives the balloon a wonderful opportunity to look at several things, including NGA ground stations, several other nuclear silos, communications, infrastructure relays, non-military civilian strategic assets as well, until it transits over to the Carolinas, where it gets to look down at Fort Bragg, home of Joint Special Operations Command. So the path makes sense from a military perspective if the Chinese want to literally see what we're doing in preparation for a perceived war, a perceived major war, because this
Let
will
me
give
ask
them
you.
the indications. Yes, please.
Let me ask you a question. So we used to have this pact with at least the Soviet Union called the Open Skies Initiative, right?
Yeah.
Was that repealed, or would that apply here? Is China involved in that, or is that not a thing
No.
anymore?
That pact does not apply to this scenario.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Open Skies was not Open Skies. This is one of those
Right.
deception in naming situations. Open Skies was specifically part of the START program, the Strategic Nuclear Arms Reduction, and Open Skies was specifically, it wasn't you can just fly over our country whenever you want to look at whatever you want whenever you want. It was specifically you are free to observe as we demobilize our nuclear arsenal. But that doesn't apply to this situation. We're not demobilizing a nuclear arsenal, and we don't have this agreement with China. So Open Skies doesn't apply.
So you think, in summation, well, not in summation, but to break this down, you think that the Chinese are testing our mettle, with these balloons, in regard to how we're maneuvering in Ukraine, and if we don't act strongly and rebuff them, that they're going to feel more emboldened in the waters close to China and Japan to be more aggressive in that area.
Yes, and so they want to see right now, what are we doing? What pieces on the board are we moving at our rear echelon bases? What preparations? What units are being mobilized right now? What assets are in play? What are we preparing to do in Ukraine? And that's going to give them a fair weather gauge for what our response to them being more aggressive in the Pacific is going to be. And right now, I would say that our counterparts in China are laughing at us.
Let me ask you this, with all of your vast knowledge on these subjects. Let's be charitable for a second. So is there any reason why strategic that could be beneficial to the United States, why the Biden administration is taking a weak posture on this, and why they would be remaining silent and allowing it to happen?
Clearly, it is in the Biden administration's best interest not to engage this target. Clearly, it is in the Biden administration's best interest not to be strong against China. Unfortunately, the Biden administration's interests in this matter and many others are not America's best interest. And that's very unfortunate. It's also telling. There is no national interest that is served by allowing this balloon to pass over our territory unchallenged. It emboldens not only future incursions by China, but also future incursions by other nations. We had a hard enough time keeping Russian aircraft out of American airspace prior to January 20th of 2021. Now we're telling the entire world that our airspace is available like a cheap hooker at Biden's family reunion.
Well, okay, so what you're saying then, in an answer to my question, is that there's no reason that would be in the United States' best interest for him to be dealing with this situation the way that he's dealing with it,
No,
which is basically to not deal with it. There's
right.
nothing, no strategic background, no 4D chess that the administration could be playing that
No,
would benefit
only
the
if they're
United States.
playing to lose.
Only if they're playing
No,
to lose.
only if
Hmm.
they're playing to lose.
Okay. Well, that's all very disconcerting considering that uh, one of the major, I mean, China has been one of the major countries in the world showing a lot of aggression on multiple different levels, whether you're talking about economically aggression, whether you're talking, which is was Trump's whole situation and why he did the old tariffs and everything with them, or cyber issues that we've had with China, even down to intellectual property and those kinds of things, right? So, what's the broadest implication here on those other aspects that China has been aggressive on? Whether we're talking about cyber terrorism, whether we're talking about economic terrorism, whether we're talking about intellectual terrorism.
Well, look, what we've done is we've basically disincentivized any kind of above board play on the part of China. This sitting regime in the occupants of the White House right now have basically given China full license to do whatever it wants to, again, with no repercussions. They've taught the Chinese that so long as these people are in charge of our nation will not hold them accountable for any actions. And that lack of accountability is going to create a lot more problems for our nation before we ever start seeing viable solutions. We see, look, people who do cyber warfare know that the CCP and the Kremlin launch daily, hourly, several times an hour cyber attacks against our nation. The fact that we don't see more impact from these attacks uh, it shows to the persistence of our defenders. But what we're going to see is we're going to see, not just an increase of cyber, of economic trade war, of we're going to see a lot more open belligerence. We're going to see a lot more hostility, and if we don't start making our adversaries feel accountable for their actions on the global stage, then we might as well just all start learning how to say ni hao and figure out what our subservient role to our new Chinese overlords will be.
Well,
That really
let's take
are
this.
the only two options on the board.
Let's take this to Ukraine. So, the Pentagon announced another round of funding today for Ukraine. Do you think that these two situations are at all related?
Yes. First
In
and
terms
foremost,
of the new announced funding today and this balloon situation.
not in the causal sense. Again, China is watching our response to Ukraine, and our response to
Mhm.
Ukraine has been to make every wrong decision possible along the way, unless we want to destroy our own nation. If that's our goal, then hey, we're doing it. We should just keep doing exactly what we're doing right now. But if we truly wanted the Ukraine conflict to end, then it would be incumbent upon the United States to enforce a ceasefire, to declare a ceasefire, to force an armistice, and to force both, preferably through enticement, but if by necessary, drag them kicking and screaming to the negotiating table and start negotiating a lasting ceasefire as cessation of hostilities and some sort of an outcome that didn't look like a continuous war.
The only person I've
Unfortunately,
seen. Go ahead. Go ahead.
unfortunately, we've raised an entire generation of people who are used to the United States being involved in war, and the war that they're used to seeing is a flavor of war that's very peculiar and very specialized. They're used to seeing the United States engaged in a war that is designed for no one to win. It's designed to be a sustained, persistent campaign that always happens over there and that really doesn't affect their lives. 99.5% of Americans were completely unaffected by 20 years of war in Iraq and
No.
Afghanistan because we were fighting a very limited adversary. Once we start bringing Russia and China into this game, now we're engaged in a different type of war. And I'm not just talking about the nuclear kind. These are both major military forces with major expeditionary capabilities. There is a flotilla of Chinese missile cruisers off the Pacific coast right now. There's another float. There's the Russian Navy has returned to expeditionary capacity and can now sail across the Atlantic whenever it wants to. This means that conventional, not nuclear, conventional rockets can rain down on any city in the United States at any point in time. Russian bombers routinely and Russian transports routinely challenge our airspace to see what we'll do about it. And the more we start playing these roll over and play weak games with them, the more we enable and encourage that sort of thing. The Chinese Navy has grown faster than any other military force on Earth in the last 6 years. And they now have more hulls in the water capable of firing more missiles than the United States does. Strategically, this policy is called screwed. So what we have to do is take this position for what it is. Okay, China didn't invest all this money into an expeditionary navy just because they like seeing great things in the water. They did it because there's a goal, there's a plan, and they are willing to push that might. They're willing to project that force. This will be a war unlike anything that anyone in America has seen in a century if this war is not stopped, because this will be American cities burning. This will be Americans fighting to defend their homes against an enemy that is truly capable of penetrating our territory and is perfectly willing to send troops into it. The Russian army does not respect the lines on the map. If we're providing tanks, aircraft, missiles, troops into a conflict in Ukraine, the Russian army the Kremlin is perfectly happy to send people through right across our open southern border and to have them play Mary Hob on the U.S. communities, not military bases, not federal buildings, on your city. If we don't stop this war from happening, it could very well turn into the kind of war we haven't seen on this continent in over a century. And Americans are not prepared to deal with that.
No, they aren't. Well, and that brings me to the point of there was just recently a company, I forgot the name of the company, is offering a free AK-47 to anybody who takes down the Chinese balloon. If you didn't hear that. And so, I mean, with it flying over central Missouri, this is a very distinct possibility. You know what I mean?
The good news is the balloon has descended from the first balloon. Now there are two. There's a second one over Canada right now that's been collecting on military installations.
Canada didn't care at all. I mean, they're
Canadian Air Force. They've been collecting on that just today too. There's a second balloon up in Canada, but the first balloon has descended from 90,000 feet ish to now we're calling it 60,000 feet. But I can't hit it at lower than 3,000 because that's about a straight line in the air shot from my 308. That's about as far as I can promise to engage. So it has to come down much, much lower for me to be able to cash in on that offer. But the thing is,
cows, man. You know what I mean? Like, I'm telling you, Missouri is not the place to be messing with that.
We could shoot this balloon down. The United States has military resources to take this down. Even though most of our fighter jets usually don't go above 50,000 feet or so, we do have platforms that can get up there and deliver an air-to-air kill. Of course, the world's greatest Navy, once the world's greatest Navy, now I'm not sure, but the United States Navy does have a fleet of guided missile destroyers that are capable of putting missiles anywhere up to and including orbit. So we could shoot this thing down anytime we want to. The question is, why don't we want to? And the answer is because I think the answer is found in humor. Honestly, I love the Babylon Bee just put out a joke story of President Biden said he'll shoot down the Chinese balloon as soon as he's done letting it spy on us. I think that until the Brandon Harris regime is convinced that their Chinese overlords are satisfied with all of the information that they've collected on our status of forces and our order of battle, that they're going to let this balloon go unmolested through airspace. And I think that that's a damning statement for our nation's leaders right now.
Well, yeah, I agree. I love history, and I just remember, think of Sputnik, right? This Union shoots off a satellite into orbit with very limited capabilities, if any, and the whole United States government, the people just basically said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! This is not allowable." Kennedy brought it on himself, but when he found out there were missiles in Cuba, it was, okay, we're going to blockade you. We might invade. This shall not stand kind of situation. And now it seems like you're describing that we have a government that just is sloughing this off in a way that, Eisenhower, Kennedy even would have just pulled their hair out, so to speak, to see happening. And I think it speaks to the only world leader or the only person of repute that I see saying we need to bring Ukraine to the table, that we need to de-escalate this situation, that we need to show strength against China in these kind of situations is Donald Trump right now. He's saying, he's at least saying we need to try to stop this war that you're describing as a very real possibility. What is it, as we wrap this part of the conversation up, what has changed since Eisenhower, and the 1950s? I mean, I know this is a big, long, but if you can boil this down, what has changed between the leaders we had then and the leaders we have now?
The leaders we have now come from a culture that doesn't celebrate victory and doesn't esteem strength. And I hearken back to, basically, there's only one management book I would ever suggest anyone ever read. There's a cottage industry putting out these management manuals. The only one worth reading is a book called Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun, written by Dr. Wes Roberts. And in it, right there in the middle of the book, in a blink and you miss it paragraph, there's a standing quote. There's a quote that I've carried with me for 30 years since reading this book. And it goes like this: fundamental errors are inescapable when unqualified persons are allowed to exercise judgment and make decisions. Look at the people now who call themselves leaders in this country. Now, there's not a one of them that's worth their salt. There's not a one of them that's an actual leader. It's so rare to find a bona fide, genuine leader, someone who knows what it's like to succeed, someone who knows what it's like to succeed and win in the face of adversity. And the sort of tenacity, the sort of fortitude, the sort of character that is required of that has been vilified, shamed, and weeded out of our national culture for decades, more and more and more and more and more, to the point that it's considered toxic and hostile now. We have weaklings in leadership positions. We don't have leaders. And I'm talking to you, Dan Crenshaw. We have weaklings in leadership positions. And until we change that, we're going to continue to be a nation led down a path of weakness and defeat.
Well, let's take this home for a minute, because I think you just mentioned Dan Crenshaw, right? And we're talking about
who is a disappointment to both his mother and I. Yes.
And there seems to be this prevailing movement in the Republican Party that the center way, or the lead by consensus, or the uniparty mindset of, hey, if I make the most people happy, then I'm doing my job, has seeped all the way. It's vertical, right? It goes from top down and bottom up. So recently, Leslie Osborne came out, and this is a local thing, right? This is Oklahoma. Came out.
Be careful, because if you say her name 3 times, she appears.
She did our podcast with Tulsa World, and she's a Republican, right? She's a Republican,
Allegedly.
and
Yeah.
yeah, allegedly a Republican, and basically has advocated this lead by consensus issue that if she can make the most normies happy with whatever be the least controversial possible, that she's effectively doing her job, right? So explain to us the situation, Daryl. What's going on with Leslie Osborne, and why should we reject what it is that she's saying?
Okay, Leslie Osborne is the elected labor commissioner of the state of Oklahoma. And as such, she has a very important job, which, God willing, she'll actually stick to. In the military, the phrase we used was mind your panel. Now, Leslie
Don't
Osborne
exceed
is
your brief.
perfectly, exactly. Leslie Osborne is perfectly entitled to her opinion, just like anybody else is. I just wish that she would, actually know what she was talking about before she spoke. So she gets on for her routine, sympathetic podcast with some twit from the Tulsa world. Who knows? Just another propaganda agent from a mainstream network. And that's why I don't trust the Democrat agenda mainstream networks, the damn media. So I'm not cursing. It's just a handy acronym. So Leslie Osborne got on, and rather than talking about what she, as labor commissioner, is going to do to make sure that Oklahomans graduate from school ready to work in jobs that are ready for them to work in them, because there are real issues at play here. Like a third of high school graduates are illiterate, and 90% of public school students cannot read on grade level. And the changing nature of our job market and the skills necessary for people to make a livable wage, there are real issues that the labor commissioner probably ought to address. Instead, she goes on and talks about how she feels like open ballots, open primaries, ranked voting would help push our state more toward the middle. And when we talk about the political middle, look, I try to keep it simple for the public
I love
educated.
this.
So
This is
here we
great.
go. This is the bell curve. For those of you who
Meganomics right here. That's what we got.
this is
Go
it.
ahead.
So on any given issue with a spectrum answer where you can be more or less of X, then you will generally see people distributed along a fairly predictable pattern where most people are going to be sort of in the middle, and some people are going to be very not X, and some people are going to be very X. And so we call these people on the ends the extremists. You can see they're the narrow part of the bell curve. They're the smallest in number, but they're the most pure expression of that value. Let's take, for example, abortion. If you took 100 random people and each little Lego stud represents 1%, one person. If you took 100 random people and you polled them on abortion and you said, do you think abortion should be allowed? And if so, how often, how freely should abortion be allowed? And you let them self-determine their answers, they fall out pretty much like this, where you would have a very small number of people, we call them the left, who would say abortion should be absolutely allowed all the way up until at least the moment of birth, and maybe even a couple of weeks after that. That actually, the post-birth abortion, the 30-day money-back warranty, we would actually call that a radical position that doesn't fall within the spectrum. The radicals are outliers. And then over here, you would have the people who are, there's no allowance for abortion under any circumstances whatsoever, and no exceptions, no compassion, no intervention, no middle ground whatsoever. And most people are here in the middle. And I like using abortion as an example for another reason, because it just happens to be something that I track regularly, and the most recent numbers put everybody perfectly on the bell curve once again, where roughly 75% of Americans, when polled, say that maybe if we're going to have some form of abortion, there should be some sort of controls on it, so that maybe viability, or maybe heartbeat, or maybe I don't know until we get to the no. So we can use the bell curve, and admittedly, there are only three types of lies in this world: lies, damn lies, and statistics. But the bell curve is a useful statistical model to find where you are. And when we hear people like Leslie Osborne or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's hard to tell the difference, except one of them can fit in a size 7 dress. When we hear people give this whole "you're an extremist" label, we heard that thrown at Governor Stitt a lot over the course of the campaign. All that means is you more faithfully express and live out. Your dollars are matched to your philosophy. Your lifestyle really does matter. When I look at my checkbook, it really does say Chick-fil-A a lot because I really do eat God's chicken. Okay? So Leslie Osborne believes that it's the extremists in the party, she says. It's the fringe who are ruining politics in Oklahoma. And I encourage Leslie, if she really feels that way about God-fearing conservative Republicans, the voice that I think Project 46 reflects, the voice that the damn media wants excluded from the narrative entirely, then I think that Leslie might find herself happier in a more purple zone like Baltimore, and less belonging to Oklahoma values. She takes umbrage. Go ahead.
Well, her case. So what you're saying is her case is we need to lead by consensus. We need to reject. To be fair to her, I'm assuming both the extremes on the left and the right, and govern somewhere towards the middle. I have to make this point that over the last 4 years, the Overton window, which you could put up your Lego example there and kind of illustrate this as well, is the Overton window has shifted so far to the left over the last 4 years that to be center now is to be far to the left just 3 years ago. We're not talking 10 years ago. We're not talking 20 years ago. We're talking just 3 years ago. And this is something that I brought up very much in my writing, in my podcast, is that I fear that the conservatives, especially in states like Oklahoma, have accepted this new alignment to where they feel the pressure to be a part of the center of a very left-leaning country that they don't realize has lurched as far to the left. And that's why
I would respectfully disagree. I hear a lot of really smart people offer up a position that's parallel to yours, Mark. And so I don't think it's ill-informed. I don't think that it's
how dare you disagree with me, Daryl?
I don't believe it's ill-conceived, right? There are a lot of smart people who would agree with you. Okay, so you can take my respectful, take solace in that. But I would say that in the last 3-4 years, what we have seen in the discourse of American social issues is not a shift left, but we've actually undergone a social mitosis, if you will. And so now what we have, thanks to organizations like Black Lives Matter and the Democrat Nazi Party, is we now have a bifurcated America where people are again, this is the same 100 bricks, but look at what's happened to the middle. There's no middle ground anymore. We're not allowed to compromise. We're not allowed to meet in the middle. We're not allowed to find that shared ground that most of us probably would admit.
Let me push. I'm not saying you're wrong, because I can definitely see what you're saying. Right. I believe that there is an attempt. If you look at what balkanized the Balkans, it began with information, right? And so there's an attempt to divide the United States of America, whether even down to, okay, I'm going to watch Netflix and I'm going to watch the Daily Wire, right? It's I'm going to put my money to this. You see a bifurcation economically. You see a bifurcation information wise. We have two Americas in terms of the information that are coming in. Then let me play devil's advocate. Why do you have a problem with what Leslie Osborne is saying? Because she seems
who are you advocating?
I'm saying, why would you have an issue?
Wait, no, you used a term. Who are you advocating?
The devil's advocate, right? Yes.
Okay, who's again one more time?
Yes,
Okay, do you remember the song? You are the devil and the devil is bad. You are the devil and the
Yes,
devil is
yeah, I
bad.
remember. I
You are
remember.
the devil and the
Yeah,
devil is
but
bad.
past the
Okay,
terminology. I'm
right.
trying. You're saying there's a
I understand.
bifurcation, and
Right.
Leslie Osborne is saying we should, in spirit at least, or at least the way that she presents it, is saying we should reconstitute the middle.
Mhm.
My critique is that has been shifted over to the blue side of your bifurcated Lego situation, and that is what she's deeming as the middle, right?
Right.
And so if she is trying to rebuild the things that we can agree on or that
Mhm.
are acceptable for us to agree on, why do you
Mhm.
disagree with her message, so to speak?
I believe the message is a lie. And here's the critical vulnerability to the notion that we should push to the middle and lead from the middle and from the position of compromise. I love the Project Management Institute and its definition of compromise. Compromise means nobody gets what they want. So what the left has done in this nation is they have not just shifted the window to the left. That was the beginning, but they have very much tribalized the political discourse in this nation and turned it into a situation where you can only speak if you're speaking from their side.
Mm-hmm.
None of this is given any air. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's beyond censorship now. Even it's none of that is even given any air. Case in point, look at what happened to my show. My show was deplatformed twice last year. I have been put in Facebook jail. I'm serving 3 concurrent life sentences in Facebook jail. I was first put into Facebook jail for live streaming from the Capitol building during January 6th because I was actually showing people live and in real time what was going on. And I
Mm-hmm.
did so without a mask on.
Well,
Right?
your beard is a mask. I mean, for
Yeah,
all
all I
intents
have
and
to do is this and you can't see me.
and it's
So
about as effective, I imagine. So, but
right. So I mean, I'm serving. Facebook admins told me that they would let Donald Trump on before they'd let me back on. Okay. So
wow.
yeah. So that's how hardcore they were about making sure the message wouldn't get out. That's why we're now on Rumble, and people who want to follow the show need to go to Rumble, go to the Project 46 profile, Project 46 OK, and follow the Daily Dose of Daryl. There's my selfish plug. So
Mm-hmm.
the left has not just shifted the middle over one direction or the other now, though. They've actually created the wall of us and them, of tribalism, and said, we're the only ones who are good. Anything that isn't from us is bad and it's forbidden. Now let's look at that in the context of the COVID narrative,
Well,
right?
let's be careful here.
Let's not
Careful,
do
careful.
that in the context of COVID narrative because
Yeah,
YouTube might ban might
yeah.
strike this from the servers. So, but you and that right there
No,
illustrates
I know.
my point. Okay,
That is the illustration. Yes, I get it.
but I believe that the people who call to lead into the middle again are willing to sacrifice whatever they need to as far as their principles are concerned. They don't belong over here. They're over here somewhere, right? And they're willing to sacrifice this. This is what we call the party line. They're willing to sacrifice the party line. They're willing to sacrifice principle in order to gain power. And I have an inherent distrust for anyone who's willing to compromise their principles in order to gain power. So when we see politicians who really take a middle of the road, mealy mouth, wishy washy, I don't know where I'm going to be today sort of a road, just so that they can create for themselves a place at that establishment table. And I'm talking to you, James Langford. Then what we see is we see people who really, again, this circles back to you don't get leadership anymore. You get management. I need a William Wallace right now. I don't need that guy from The Office.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Michael Scott.
We need strong leaders right now. We're coming into hard times.
Let me
Most
let me
Yeah,
bring
go ahead.
something up though, because I agree with you definitely when it comes to the left, but I am concerned because I see a little bit of this coming from the right now as well. You know, for example,
Hmm.
um, the legislature, you know, votes to spend 1.7 billion dollars worth of ARPA funds,
Hmm.
while at the same time they're griping about inflation and all of that. And you had a majority, a major majority of the Republican legislature in the
Hmm.
Oklahoma, in the reddest state in the country,
Hmm.
vote to spend $1.7 billion worth of ARPA funds, basically Biden's COVID blood money,
Yeah.
on various amounts of different things. And they were all too eager to do that.
Hmm.
And I'm seeing those kinds of things come from Republicans in red states far too often, to
Yes.
where because money equals power in many cases, right? You get more
Mhm.
money, you throw things at it, you get more favors, you get that's just the way
Yeah.
it works. So should we, as Republicans, as conservatives, be looking a little bit inward too and minding our own house here? Because I see a lot of, well, if you criticize something like that, then you're just helping out the left, right? You're just
Hmm.
helping out the radical left. What is your opinion on that? Why did we see Republicans in Oklahoma do that?
Well, I think we saw Republicans in Oklahoma demonstrate the true strength of their convictions. Exactly how much did they believe in those principles they told us they did? And so I think that in the case of ARPA funds, for example, you're basically buying yourself favor with the voters. We're going to give you some money to make you feel better about yourself because we know how much you're struggling right now. Well, you know what? I think we need to struggle because if we don't struggle, the alternative is we spend ourselves into oblivion.
But
I
very
think that
few
we
of those
need.
ARPA funds, let me challenge you here. Very few of those ARPA funds went to any individual voter. I mean, they all went to, $100 million to the OU medical industrial complex. You had, lots of things going to
Which
very
only
big.
made like what 30% of the state happy because OU got better.
Did OU get better? I think actually
I
OU
mean,
got worse.
it
You know what I mean?
didn't. But if you're
Right.
throwing money at one of the most popular institutions in the state,
Well, and
then doesn't
they
that
gave
curry a bunch of favor with Joe Oklahoma?
uh, maybe if they're not paying attention. I mean, if they're
Yeah.
paying attention, which most people weren't. I'm just saying that they weren't trying to curry favor with voters. They were trying to curry favor with people um, who have a stake, if you want to say stakeholders, right, in
Hmm.
these large operations for where all this money went to. And it seemed to me that Joe Schmo voter actually got the short end of the stick because when you inject $1.7 billion into a state economy, what's going to happen? You're going to get
Inflation.
inflation. You're going to have your
Yeah.
eggs become much more expensive. You're going to have all of these kinds of things that we're seeing, right? So, what
Hmm.
is it? And there were Republicans who I very much support on most things that were just like,
Hmm.
yeah, let's do this. And I'm like, well, how on earth, man? I just didn't get it. So
If you follow those numbers, I would agree with you that those dollars didn't translate into, Joe Oklahoma's pocketbook. But if you follow where those dollars did go and what those dollars were spent on, I would put forth the theory that those projects, those spend points, were the love children of the people whose favor our legislature is trying to carry. Okay, I have
mhm.
been in talks with state Republican state senators for well over a month now regarding an issue that I thought was a grammatic error in a law that was passed during COVID. And it turns out it wasn't a grammatic error, it was a purposeful piece of legislation that in the process is going to cost Oklahoma veterans $50 million.
What is
And that's
this?
not that's not money not coming to veterans from
Uh,
benefits or anything. That's money coming out of veterans' pocketbooks. That's money
okay,
coming out of my checkbook.
what's
Okay.
the bill?
It's Senate Bill
Well,
415. It's a rather nebulous tax bill, and somewhere in there, there's the section that talks about the state benefits to veterans, disabled veterans, based on how disabled you are, entitled to certain benefits. Up to this point, those benefits were handled directly by the veteran. I, as a veteran, would get my letter from the VA, and then I would go to the Fish and Wildlife and get my
Mm-hmm.
reduced tax or whatever it is, right? I get that letter, and now all of a sudden my car is property tax free, so my license plates are $7 a year instead of whatever it is you normies pay. I don't know what things cost, right? So now all of that has to pass through ODVA. And between delays in service, delays in benefits, administrative costs, and everything like that, we have a working number of about $50 million for the cost of that change. The preponderance of that money comes out of the pocketbook of veterans in terms of gapped service, discontinued benefits. The state tax commission did not reach out to the veterans of the state and let us know directly that this was going to happen. I never would have found out about it if I hadn't heard some random commercial while I was driving to town to go eat my Chick-fil-A. So thank God for cheap radio. But the point is, that's money coming out of my pocket. And no one checked with me to see if I even wanted or needed somebody else's help with this. And when I went to Republican lawmakers, including the chair of our Veteran and Military Committee, I was told that this just wasn't a legislative priority for them. That this is going to translate into a huge increase in the budget for ODVA, that large amounts of that money are passed through derivatives from federal grants that have no cap, just performance requirements based on the number of veterans served. ODVA doesn't service a lot of veterans prior to the passage of this bill because most veterans don't want anything to do with ODVA because there's no value added. And here's a direct quote from the director of benefits, the director of claims and benefits, Randy Law, at ODVA. Direct quote from him: "There is no value added for the veteran to ODVA's intervention and involvement in this process. There's only cost. There's only loss. There's only disabled veterans who are going to fall through the cracks. There's only people who aren't even going to know this change happened until after July 1st when it takes effect. This was passed during COVID, and all we needed to do to fix this was introduce a grandfather clause into Senate Bill 415 that said, starting on July 7th or July 1st, you have to go through ODVA. Prior to July 1st, you're still covered under your legacy relationship. That's all that never, 20 words would have changed to the tune of $50 million the lives of Oklahoma's veterans. And there's not one Republican senator in Oklahoma City who felt that it was a legislative priority. Not one. So you tell me about what politicians are willing to do to curry favor. I think that politicians understand who really butters their bread. And it's not the people who may or may not show up to vote. It's the people who donate to their campaigns. It's the people who definitely show up and they bring friends and they turn out other people to go vote. People who didn't vote last time but will vote this time because the guy at the VFW said, this is a guy who took care of you.
Yeah.
So this is an example, and we've strayed way off topic, but that's an example of why I think the people are very conscious of who is buttering their bread. We can apply this to Afghan refugees in the state of Oklahoma and the cash that has been the cash cow that has been for the people mismanaging that guffaw. Anytime we see something done that becomes a priority for a politician, whether they're national or state, one of the first questions that I think we need to ask is, who is the direct beneficiary of this?
Yes, and I think that is the question we always need to be asking, is who's the direct beneficiary. And this is why I advocate, somewhat unpopularly, the same thing that I heard a hero, a restaurant owner who's running for state senate in Virginia named Matt Strickland, say on the Timcast IRL podcast the other day, that the only thing that the people have to influence politicians is political pressure. And when he's talking about political pressure, he means outside, overwhelming, uh, social media, unavoidable, unignorable pressure on not just mostly not on the people that you would normally be against, right? But on your friends, right? And this is why I get disheartened when I see the tribalism on the right flare up, because it's, well, if you're not a Republican or you're not for what our guy is doing, or if you criticize Governor Stitt, or if you criticize things they've done, then you're obviously not a true Republican. You're obviously not no, I expect more of the people who talk a big game. You know what I mean? I expect to whom much is given, much is required, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm often, because we live in the reddest state in America, in quotations, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
often way harder on Governor Stitt, or some of the people that I have grown to like and respect some of the things they've done. But when I see a lot of them, Governor Stitt he signed the ARPA funds, right? He signed that into law. He didn't even get his grocery tax lift on as a he had the biggest wedge. And that's why I brought up the OU children's issue at that point. That's why I broke that story when I did, because he could have, with one fell swoop, looked at the legislature and said, I'm not gonna sign this bill unless you do this, that, and the other. You know what I mean? He had power. And there would have been I think he could have led a insurgency of our most conservative champions in the legislature at that point, Jake Merrick, others, that would have backed him up on those things had he done it. And it was very disappointing for him to see that he didn't, and to see that others just said, yeah, we're just going to spend the money. You know what I mean? And it kind of flew under the radar as much as it could at that point. And it was just very disheartening to me, because I felt that Oklahoma had an opportunity, much like Governor DeSantis is doing in Florida right now, on many different topics, to lead the country down a path that Governor DeSantis is really leading us down now when it comes to Republican governors or conservative governors. And I think Governor Stitt would have won by 30 points instead of 16 had he done it. I mean, that's just me. I think he would have galvanized the large majority of the red state voters that said, whatever. He would have gotten more voters who don't normally vote if he'd have done that, and that's very disconcerting to me, because it shows that exactly what you're saying, that there is this who butters your bread mentality when it comes to our state government.
Yes. And I have a lot of respect for Kevin Stitt.
So do
I think Governor Stitt has done a remarkable job. He has been presented with a lot of challenges.
Yes,
I think that Governor Stitt's biggest obstacle he needs to learn how to overcome is some of the advisors that have given him terrible advice. I think as long as he can get good people giving him good gouge, and who are not betraying our state's interests and Governor Stitt's interests to other notions, whoever advised him to start a pissing contest with the tribes ought to be dragged out in front of the Capitol and flogged right in front of that big Native American statue on the Capitol steps. I think that would be poetic justice. If Kevin Stitt could stop listening to idiots and start listening to sober minds who are actually interested in the betterment of the state instead of the betterment of their position at the table, then I think that Kevin Stitt would have a remarkably successful Senate.
And I agree with you, and I think he's done good things. But the buck stops where, Daryl?
It stops with Kevin Stitt.
Right. And
he chooses his advisors, and he makes decisions based on information he is given. Yes. So the buck stops right there. You're absolutely correct.
And I would say that about every other state representative as well, is that they all get lots of information. They're deluged with lots of different things. But that's why I think maintaining a conduit to your people, and not just having, just like you said, advisors who sit high atop the thing, but also advisors who you call Joe Schmo, and you say, hey, what's going on here? Like what's the price of milk, man? How much you paying for eggs? All those kinds of things. Um, that he would benefit from that, but the buck stops with him.
Hmm.
And I think that us on the right who respect these people, and I think that who give them a lot of accolades for the good things they've done, need to be
Hmm.
as equal in our open criticism of the things they don't do, and just saying, look,
Yes.
man, we see it. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And so there's applying of political pressure to do that.
Well,
Because they
iron
all
sharpens iron. Okay.
right.
If you don't have people keeping you honest, then you get led astray until finally you're just floundering. You're just sitting out there flapping in the wind. And
Yep.
we have some good legislators in this state. There
Yes, we
is a
absolutely do.
state senator who will remain unnamed because he would probably prefer, who, when he wanted to make some legislation on a topic that I have some knowledge on, he called me and said, "Hey, can you meet me for lunch?" And I
Yeah.
said, "Absolutely." And we sat and we had lunch and we talked about the thing. And he had some ideas, and I was able to provide him with some steerage. And I was like, "Here's some specific direction you might want to take this in order to have the desired effect." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't know about that. Tell me about that." So I told him about it. And then he's like, "Okay, fine." Blam, blam, blam. Laws are written, laws are passed. Oklahoma's a better state for
Yeah.
it. We do
No,
have some wonderful state legislators who care. We
absolutely.
also have more than enough, probably too many people working in Oklahoma City right now who have bigger aspirations than the betterment of the state of Oklahoma. Ali Seafried. I mean, I don't know if we need to just go through a roster, and if we start at A for Ali Seafried, or if or if we start at national, and we maybe mix up the alphabet and just say James Langford. But I mean, it's important for us to remain constantly engaged with our representatives, because there are plenty of people sitting in seats right now who frankly did not receive my vote, but who now I have to work with or through. And I'm talking to you, Frank Lucas. So there are plenty of people who now I have to find a way to get the work done, despite the fact that the person sitting in the seat wasn't the one I wanted. I think that there are a lot of people whose pride just stops them from being able to do that. Period.
Yeah.
And they're like,
No.
I'm going to wait until somebody else gets in. Well, I mean, in the case of Frank Lucas, I thought for sure that was going to be ever, and it's not happening. So
Yeah.
you got to do
But
what you
what
got to
I'm
do.
saying is that there's positive and negative reinforcement that needs to be used, is what I'm
Yes.
saying. And I err on the side a little bit, maybe too much, and I'll get of the negative reinforcement, or at least of the daylight is best, to make the cockroaches scurry in the right direction, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that it's difficult for the average person to understand how the sausage is made, and what we have as a populace that we did not have 30 years ago is the ability to start a grassroots effort through doing exactly what you and I are sitting here doing right now, what
Hmm.
Project 46 is trying to do, what the UnWokable podcast, what Daily Dose of Daryl, all of us are trying to do is shine lights in areas that normally wouldn't have light shown. And if that stings some of the people we like, maybe they need to be stung. You know what I'm saying? And what I've also seen is that when they do get stung, there's this kind of mentality of retribution. Well, you made me look bad, so I'm done talking to you. And it's like, man, uh, if you looked bad because I told the truth, maybe you should be doing something different.
Yeah.
And it's I know we have to work with them, but we do not have to be their friends and work with them. We can still look at them and say, hey, this is wrong, and show everyone else, hey, this is wrong. Because what's gone on in Oklahoma over the past 10 to 20 to 50 20 years is a red state Republican problem. All
Hmm.
right. We've had the power. So we've got to start looking inward a little bit. And yes, there is a left problem, and there's rhinos all over the place, and there's all of those things. But they've largely not wielded the power. You know what I'm saying? Like if we're talking about,
We have
and
a
so
great problem in Oklahoma. Okay. We have a state that is pushing right, and we're pushing right hard. This state is through the fire. It's becoming more conservative. It's becoming more right leaning. It's becoming more uh, open with and more consistent with those Oklahoma values, you know? And I think that that's a wonderful problem to have because now we have people on the extreme right who are saying, well, you weren't conservative enough fast enough. And I'm like, hey, you know what? Just be happy that the shift is coming your way. I'm tired of being anti stuff. I find it to be much more peaceful for my mind to be pro stuff. So rather than focus on, where we might have disagreed, let's find let's do something that Leslie Osborne almost said right. Let's find the places where we can agree, but let's use that as a springboard to go where we need to go, not as an excuse to compromise our values and to give ground. We have given so much ground in this nation, in this state, in our cities, in our homes, in our churches. We have given ground to the wrong, to the
how do
evil,
we
to the
not?
wicked. We have given
How do we
to
not give ground though, Daryl? How do we
it.
because it seems to me that giving ground always comes from a place of, okay, here are our shared values,
Mhm.
right? And
There
then
does.
the
I'm
movement
not a comic
afterward,
book guy. I'm
right,
not a
right. But
comic book guy, but I love. There's a quote in the Captain America comic book that they used in the Civil War movie. And I'm going to butcher it, but this is where we don't give ground. Sometimes you have to put your feet down firmly and you say, no, I'm not going to give. Maybe you just need to pick that one thing. Maybe it's the sanctity of human life and being pro life, not anti abortion. I am anti abortion, but I've actually graduated to pro life now. My heart breaks for babies instead of my fists rage at baby murderers. There's a difference in the way that my soul feels over that. I think that you can be, and I think that you just need to find whatever it is that you hold dear, and you just need to put your feet down and you say, I'm not going to give on this. It's just not
right,
going to happen. You give. I'm not going to. I
right.
think if you
But
don't
how does
have
the
anything
common
in your
person?
life that you're not willing to do that for,
And
then you just don't have beliefs.
that is great rhetoric. That's awesome rhetoric, and I
That's
agree
not
with you.
rhetoric, it's a lifestyle.
I get it, but we're not the ones making the decisions, and this is my point: is that at I believe that far too many of those issues are seated at the point where the dollar meets the road.
Mhm.
And ARPA was that illustration for me, because it that whole process of that money coming from the federal government did so much anti-conservative damage, to the state, and
Mhm.
we're accepting that with open arms. But everyone at a certain point, as I was moving through that OU children's issue, and I was saying, look, here's an opportunity that if you're going to take that money, then you need to do something that stands on your laurels and use that to do it. And I immediately got hit with, well, you're not playing by the team. You're not supporting our really conservative people. And I'm sitting here going, no, 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 no. We're not talking about whether we're going to raise taxes or not. We're not talking about, whether we're going to, raise regulations or not. We're talking about whether or not we're going to allow children to be surgically altered before the age of 16
Mhm.
using taxpayer dollars. And right now we have the opportunity to stop it wholesale. And everyone kicked and I hope they do it. And I think there are people who are out there working, St. Jet and Nathan Dahm and Senator Bullard and lots of great legislators are working on that, and I give them props.
Mhm.
But in the moment, we capitulated. We said, nope, we're not gonna. And there is a possibility, just like has been the case of the last 2 or 3 years, that none of those bills see the light of day. And we capitulated. And when I was bringing that forward, it was, I was the naysayer. I wasn't the person playing on the team, and most Republicans in this area were against me on that. And I'm going, if we can't decide in a moment like this, where we have an opportunity to stand on what it is you're talking about, not being I'm not anti-child, I'm pro-child, right?
Mhm.
I'm pro a child not being altered before the age of consent unless they decided to do it themselves. I'm pro that, right?
Mhm.
And we didn't. And not just me, but several people were demonized for having that
Mhm.
stance by some of the people I've grown to respect. And so that's what I'm talking about here, Daryl,
Mhm.
is that I think that we have to measure, and I've said this before, I'm often too much on the negative, I guess, right? But there's got to be more people who are willing to put the feet to the fire of people that we like in these situations so that they stand on what it is they say they believe. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I agree.
they,
I agree. I
yeah,
think that people need to be accountable to the positions that they believe, that they say they hold. Unfortunately, that's the difference between the philosopher and the businessman. The
yeah.
philosopher will stick to their principles, cost be damned, because right is right and wrong is wrong. The businessman eventually will see the cost is too high
Mm-hmm.
and will cave. I think that's the difference. I think we have plenty of businessmen for
Well,
sale
and
in Oklahoma
that's
City.
you talk about the WEF and you talk about that kind of whole global vertical agenda that's really springing out of universities. The University of Oklahoma has its strategic research verticals that is wholly committed to uh, what they say, going outside the boundaries of a university and creating public-private partnerships to push a global economic agenda through businesses. And
Mm-hmm.
and this is why I get nervous about, or I try to let people know that the market has been captured, and it's been captured with incentives that push that agenda along. And whether we're seeing it in Oklahoma City and with people like Leslie Osborne, when they talk about the middle, when they talk about these situations, they're talking about this agenda that's going to, rising tide raises all ships, but where is the water leading us? You know what I mean? And I know we're getting close to time. We've been on for an hour, and I'm going to have you back on my own show. That way, I think we could talk more about the WEF.
Mm-hmm.
But and you provide so many insights into this situation about this agenda, and I think that we need to be cognizant of where we're talking about our own legislators, our own elected officials, that this is an issue. This global mindset of a global economy and how that trickles down into things like the prices of eggs.
Mm-hmm.
So to button it up, give us just an insight, some words of wisdom on how we can look out for that kind of infusion of globalist mindset economically into our everyday lives through things like eggs.
Well, Mark, you short circuit the globalist agenda by living local. You treat your dollars like the bullets that they are, and you stop giving them to the enemy. You stop giving them to faceless organizations. I don't buy anything anywhere that I can't look the owner of the store in the eye or the actual manufacturer of the object. Now, as a micro farmer, I produce a growing amount of my own food. We struggled through the drought, and I'll be leading my audience through that this summer as we try again because I want to see more people succeeding. But I think that if we're going to short circuit the globalist agenda, then we have to stop feeding our dollars to anonymous, faceless organizations because their agenda isn't necessarily the betterment of my town, of my school, of my family, of me, of my church. And so I try to look through the life cycle of my purchases. I try to, what did I touch today? Where did I get that? And who actually provided that for me? And if they're not someone I personally know, if they're not a friend, if they're not someone I know, then maybe they're a fellow veteran. Good enough for me. Maybe they're a fellow Christian and I know it. I don't even get my deodorant from somebody who's not a Christian now. We've had to change everything in our purchasing in my household to make sure that our dollars were aligned with our principles. And I think that that's what you do. If you can't focus your dollars local, if you can't look a rancher in the eye here in Oklahoma and know where your beef was coming from, then you're living wrong, because we produce more beef in Oklahoma than most nations on earth. We have no problems feeding our own people as long as we don't sell our farmland to the CCP, right?
Right.
As long as Oklahomans keep raising Oklahoma beef, then I can walk across the road and shake a rancher's hand and look at one of his cows and just look at her and say, "Oh, soon, soon."
Yeah.
Right? And but you have to start living local. You have to turn your focus local. You have to stop worrying about the castles in the sky, and you have to start spending your time and your dollars where they truly matter, and stop buying things at Walmart's, Targets, and places like that. And even if maybe sometimes, because I know that the pandemic definitely got us used to buying things a certain way. Now everybody buys things through Amazon or has things sent to them on subscriptions, stuff like that. Then fine, at least target your vendor. All right, my coffee comes from the mailbox, but it's a local company that's locally owned, veteran owned, Christian owned. I know where those dollars are going. When readers go to Amazon and order a book with my name on it, which is a good life choice because literally everybody who reads my books likes them. So but even though they're using Amazon, that's a small business. That's an individual that you're ordering from. Amazon's just delivering the box for you.
Right.
So there are other small businesses out there. There's a small business in Missouri that I get probably 40% of my gun parts from. And I don't even own any guns. They all fell off a boat into Lake Skiatook as soon as the ATF announced their rule. So, but I still buy gun parts because on general principle. But it's a small business in Missouri, even though it's being fulfilled by a big company. I'm making sure those dollars go there. Organizations like the World Economic Forum and your politicians in Oklahoma City share something in common other than the script that a lot of them are reading. And that is that without your direct support, they can't wield any power. That's how we beat them.
That is how we beat them. And that's such a wisdom coming from Daryl E.J. Simmons right here. And I recommend that you go watch his morning podcast every day, Daily Dose of Daryl. That's what Project 46 is trying to do. In general, is try to bring together voices like mine, Daryl's, like Andrew Spino, like Red River TV, and Janelle and Kevin Batts, and Jenny White, and lots of different others that all have very varying different opinions on many different issues, but all come from a local mindset, and wanting to get you the information you may not always have. If you go, what is the new email, the new address that we can send people to Project 46? It's not project46.com anymore. It's do you remember it, Daryl? I'll put it up.
No,
there.
I thought it was still project46.com.
I think you can still go there. So project46.com, you spell that out, Project FORTY 6. And
yes,
you can subscribe to
FORTY.
Project 46. You can subscribe to Project 46 with my UnWokable, what did they call it? Code.
Well, I don't know what you're calling it, but the promo code Daily Dose.
Code, yes. So you can do promo code Daily Dose. You can also do promo code UnWokable. You can to get up to 30% off on that subscription and see lots of great content coming out that's going to inform you about the state of Oklahoma, about what's going on locally in this state.
Absolutely. Our freedom is walked out on Main Street, not on Pennsylvania Avenue. And that's where our focus needs to be.
Exactly right. So if you're on YouTube right now, like, subscribe, and share the channel UnWokable at UnWokable Pod. Go look for Daryl on Rumble, Daily Dose of Daryl on Rumble, on the Project 46 channel too, I believe. And there is, he gives you tons of information. And I'm going to have him on just on my show, maybe a late night conspiracy theory show. We might do something like that. I don't know. Without, getting me knocked off YouTube, if that is possible, because you are so toxic, Daryl. Well, Daryl, thanks for being a part of the pod today for the weekly week in review podcast here on Project 46. And everybody, go seek out these sources of information, because if you don't, we're going to die away. And then you're going to be less informed about what's going on in your local area. So, Daryl, thank you so much. And everybody, catch us next week, next Friday, same bat time, same bat channel.